So my name is Ioana Ciuta. I work for CE Bankwatch Network. What we do, well, the hint is in the name. We are following what banks do with their money. I must make a clarification. What the kind of banks that we do watch are the public banks, such as the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development and the European Investment Bank, and for some time we used to look at the World Bank and so on. So these are giving us quite a lot of work on their own. So looking at any other kind of banks is a challenge in itself. I personally work on the coal campaign in the Balkans, which has three components. We are trying to fight the new coal wave that is being planned in the Western Balkan region, and I mean extended Balkan Peninsula, including Romania and Greece, for example. We are trying to make sure that the existing fleet of coal in the region is compliant with the European legislation on emissions, and if it's not, well, close. I mean, just a clarification why this is important. We released a study earlier this year showing that the 16 power plants, coal power plants in the Western Balkan region produce as much pollution as the whole of EU's coal fleet, which is 250 power plants. And yeah, we've started looking at air pollution as well, because for a very long time we heard the argument, and it's an argument that financiers are making as well, well, existing coal power plants are very polluting, we will replace them with new coal and the problem of air pollution will be solved. But what we're trying to prove, and we have proven already, I think, in the last 2-3 years, is that the pollution is not just the smoke that comes out the chimney of the power plants. It's also the associated infrastructure, such as the lignite open pit mines, the ash disposal sites, which are not properly disposed. And these associated facilities will not disappear, and the problem will not disappear with the appearance of new coal infrastructure. These are basically the projects that have been mentioned in the region. We group them into 3 categories to kind of prioritize our work as well, because it's 3 of us doing all of this in the campaign. So the first generation projects are those which are at a rather advanced permitting stage. Either they have a environmental impact assessment decision, or they have a financing contract, or they benefit from very heavy political support. And some are expected to, well, are expected by their promoters to go into construction anytime. Second generation projects, which do have, for instance, a memorandum of understanding with a Chinese contractor or a Chinese company that would build it, and have some kind of feasibility studies or pre-permitting procedures. And basically the third generations, these projects are always mentioned in some documents like energy strategies or priorities of the electricity companies in the countries, but we don't think they would become a reality anytime soon. And for a bit of a visual representation of what we work on, you will notice the 2 green spots. Those are 2 projects that we managed to cancel in the region. One was in Plomin in Croatia, and this was being promoted by and was about to be constructed by a Japanese consortium. It was in the end declared dead by the Croatian government because it didn't comply with state aid rules under the European, under the EU legislation, which is something that we heard in the morning that, you know, the EU legislation on state aid is very restrictive. Here comes China with bilateral agreements that makes everything easier. Basically, that's what we see in all the projects that are not under a green spot. The green spot is a recent success in Montenegro, in Pljevlja. This was a power plant that one of the bidders was initially a Chinese company called CEMC, and it was supposed to be financed by China Development Bank. In the end, the Montenegrin government did conduct a public tender, and at the time, the bidder which had the best bid was Škoda Praga, and it was meant to be financed by the Czech Export Credit Agency, which in the end pulled out from the deal 2 years ago. And finally this year, the Montenegrin government said, okay, we're not going forward with coal projects in any kind of way. We'll dedicate time and resources to look into alternatives. The black spot in Bosnia and Herzegovina is the only coal power project that kind of went through our fingers. It is in Stanari. I will come back to that as an example. It's the only coal power plant that was built since the late 80s in the region, and it was built by a Chinese company called Dongfang and funded by a loan from the China Development Bank. And the red dots are our first priority projects, moving at a very fast pace and having a dynamics that is quite worrying to us. I said in the beginning that what we do at Bankwatch, basically for 25 years, it was to look especially into projects in the energy sector, which have demonstrably the highest environmental impact, see how the public banks are financing these projects, and then come up with examples to see, like, look, this project has this impact on the environment, this impact on the local community. It violates these policies that the banks have themselves in place. And then our showcasing would contribute to a strengthening of the policies of the banks themselves. So this is how we arrived in 2013 at the decision by both the EBRD and the EIB to step out of coal. Recently, the European Investment Bank changed its energy policy and announced that it will stop financing fossil fuels altogether by the end of 2021. So because of the traditional banks that finance projects in this region, we are now left with Chinese banks to deal with. However, in spite of the numerous spots you saw on the map, only 3 deals have been signed in the last years. I'm just talking about coal power plants. That is Tanari, which is already built, Kostolac in Serbia, which was mentioned this morning by Mr. Wolf, and Tuzla in Bosnia, and I will come back to all of these. Some of the second and third, some of the second generation importance or priority projects that I showed earlier have memorandum of understanding, most of which signed during those China Plus 16 or China Plus 17 lately since Greece joined. But how they don't really materialize. Like we have the memorandums of understanding, which are obviously not publicly available. So we have to request them through request for public information. But yeah, contractors and financing is a bit lagging behind. In this year, there was also a EU plus China summit in Brussels, sometime in March, I think. And there was this headline that I really liked. It said, ahead of the summit, the EU needs to show that it has a plan for China, because clearly China has a plan for the EU. So kind of the Commission and the Parliament are starting to catch up with China's interest in projects that it has already financed or promised to finance in the region, and come up with a response. So they did this in a communication to the Council in March. They meaning the European Commission, saying, look, there is a huge contradiction between what China is promising on the international scene. Take, for example, the agreement with the United States from 2015. Of course, a lot of things changed since then in both countries, but that is what has driven China to be the biggest overseas financier of coal power plants. It was because domestically, China agreed to reduce emissions from its coal power plant and to put a moratorium on coal mining even. So that is, for example, why I know of at least one project in Mongolia, which is bound to a coal power project in Baga Nur, as far as I remember. Basically build a coal power plant in Mongolia, export electricity to China. So the pollution and the impacts are outsourced to another country. And this is what is happening not just in the Western Balkans now, but all along the Belt and Road Initiative, where there are coal power projects. Because China was building a lot of coal infrastructure. They have a lot of expertise, like workforce, trained engineers who know how to do this. They have the resources, and they have developed the technology. So with the 2015 moratorium in place, the question was, well, what do we do with this extra capacity, overcapacity? Well, we'll export it. So since then, every year in all the statistics, it turns out that China is championing air pollution reductions at home, but it's also championing exports of coal infrastructure. And obviously, the preference is for countries where rule of law is kind of a interpretable concept, which we often see in the Western Balkans. Bilateral agreements, sure. It was mentioned in the presentation this morning. They are very, very popular. And what is also noticeable about these projects that are being proposed is the type of contract that the receiving the host country makes with the Chinese constructor and financier. It is this engineering procurement construction contract, which means basically Chinese companies bring the technology, bring the workforce, they build it, and then they take their hands off of it. That's why the economic argument was never one that resonated with the Chinese financiers, because the concept is, we'll deliver this power plant, it will belong to the state or to the company which which promoted the project. I'm scared to say made the investment. And then it doesn't really concern the Chinese counterpart whether that profit is profitable or not. And we see already the concept of stranded assets. It's not a new one. It has happened already in Italy and in Germany 5-6 years ago with gas power plants, because they built a lot of infrastructure. It was too expensive to operate. and then new power plants just lay idle. So this is the logic of the EPC contract that, well, we'll just deliver this project, and it's up to the country to deal with it if it's in any kind of economic problem. And also what we find problematic, having this, as I said earlier, having in BankWatch this experience of working with the international financiers directly and having their own policies and conditions to abide by themselves as financiers. In the case of Chinese projects and Chinese loans, it is the deal between the financier and the host country is that it basically relies upon the host country's legal provision. And I mean, the financier won't take any kind of responsibility if the host country doesn't, for example, organize public debates on the environmental impact assessment study for a certain project. We'll just say, well, the client told us it was fine, it was by the rules in the national law, we will not interfere. And basically, this is a comparison between what we know from the traditional multilateral development banks and international financial institutions that we follow with what we notice in the projects that are promoted by Chinese actors. So you have all these consultation periods, information disclosure, categorization of projects, and so on. Then you have country system within the policies of the banks themselves, sector industry guidelines. You have a civil society office, and you have grievance mechanisms. Whereas with Chinese actors, there are none of these tools. There is this piece of, well, it is a guideline, so basically it is a recommendation. Some of our colleagues call it, you know, the Green Credit Directive, making it sound as if a directive in the EU, like it's something obligatory, but it's a set of principles that were adopted in 2013 by the government of China to lay out the rules that the banks need to abide by when they finance overseas projects. So as I said, they're not obligatory in the end. They're a set of guidelines, and what we noticed in practice was that they are not being really adopted or followed through. So they require all these things in the directive: due diligence of the project, before and after project evaluations, third-party independent assessment of the environmental impact assessment, and other permits. There is a provision on consultation with affected communities. I've been to these communities numerous times, and there was never any kind of Chinese bank representative to talk to them. Obviously, the biggest problem is that there's no grievance mechanism. So you're just, if you are a community that thinks will be impacted by a project, all you have to rely upon is your national legal system, right? Which we know in the region, it takes a lot of time to get to a decision. Many times, simple citizens or even NGOs don't have standing in courts. So they're kind of trapped. Like, there is no body of the financier to go to and say, look, we have these issues, we would like you to sort them out before this project moves forward. Yeah, so now I'll just go to a couple of examples, specifically from this map. As I said, Stanari, the one under the black dot in Bosnia and Herzegovina, that is the first Chinese-funded coal project in the region. It is quite special also in the sense that all the other projects are being promoted by the state-owned energy company, whereas this one in Bosnia, it's a private company, EFT, which is registered in the UK. It was financed, as I said, by China Development Bank and constructed by Dongfang. Entered operation in September 16. One of the biggest problems we have with this technology that is being used in Stanari is that it uses a dry cooling system, which brings down efficiency to this very little percent, whereas the other types of, or the best available techniques and other types of technology recommend something between 38 and 32%. What this efficiency means in reality, it's like you burn 100 tons of coal, but only 34.5 of those are actually transformed into electricity. The rest is, well, emits pollution and is, wasted, not transformed into electricity. And this is what it sometimes looks when it's starting up. I mean, it's not, you don't see this every day, but for a new plant to have, our colleague said it's happened at least 4 or 5 times in the last 2 years since it was put into operation. So it is kind of worrying. This is the broader area, the power plant there, the coal mine here, and the village here. Since it started operations in 2016, what have we noticed about this power plant? For instance, no emissions were reported, and this is quite, no emissions, from the pollutants of the power plant. And this is quite worrying because initially in 2013, or earlier, 2012, when the environmental permit was approved, the power plant was allowed to emit 3 times more above the national emission limits in the Bosnian legislation. It was subject to a complaint to the energy community. I have to make a disclaimer and or a footnote to explain what the energy community is for the people in the room who may not be familiar. So it is a treaty, an intergovernmental treaty between the EU and its immediate neighbors, which means the Western Balkans, Moldova, Ukraine, and Georgia. And its aim is to open the electricity market of the EU to the electricity market of its neighbors. So through this treaty, basically, countries of the Western Balkans, Moldova, Ukraine, and so on, are able to export electricity and to import electricity among EU countries. It came in a package with selected legislation on environment, and that is why, basically, when we're analyzing environmental permits in one of the Western Balkan countries, we are also checking it against the legislation in the energy community. So what I was saying that it took a complaint to the energy community back in 2012 so that the permit would stipulate the maximum allowed pollution limits in that legislation. In the meantime, more strict standards will apply from 2027 onwards, even in the energy community countries. They already do in the EU. So the power plant won't be compliant with those, just 12 years after it entered operation. We also noticed quite long periods on which the power plant was not operating. So we kind of don't know if this is normal for a new power plant to be taken down for a month and a half in a row. What is the issue? Maybe it wasn't ready to go online at all at the time. I already said, like in the EU, the pollution standards are stricter now than they were when the power plant went online, and they will come to Bosnia as well through the energy community. So in 10 years, it won't be compliant anymore. There's community discontent regarding how the mine is being operated because it flooded the nearby village quite a couple of times in the past. And the project is also subject to investigation regarding overseas or transboundary impact assessment because when the plant was permitted, its potential impacts on the neighboring countries were not assessed. It was also reported in the media, 2017, I think, that the Croatian electricity company would be interested in buying the power plant itself, or at least 50% of the shares. So it kind of raised some question: is it profitable? Why would the project owner want to sell it? But I mean, this has been quiet since. Moving on to the second example, Kostolac. In Kostolac, there is a project that has already been completed, and that consists of rehabilitation of an existing unit and installation of pollution reduction equipment, which is desulfurization, or the DSOx that is in the title. So this was already agreed on in 2011. It had a loan from China Exim Bank for nearly $300 million, which consisted of reconstruction of these blocks, the DSOx system, a landing dock on the Danube, and some rail infrastructure to transport the byproduct of desulfurization from the power plant. Then it started construction in 2015, even before the environmental impact assessment procedure was concluded, and even before a construction permit was issued. The community noticed that the construction started. And yeah, in record time, with less than a month after we noticed and we complained that the construction had already began, the construction permit and the EIA permits were issued. And this is from July 2017, depicting the Serbian Prime Minister and the Serbian Ministry of Energy celebrating that the construction of the pollution reduction equipment, the DSOx, has been finalized. And this is what happened in reality. These are the emissions from the power plant from 2014 till last year, the sulfur dioxide emissions. I marked there 2017 because that is when, the equipment was installed. Okay, we should not expect a 95% reduction in the emissions as the permit said for the whole year, but we would expect it at least in 2018, and it's still only an 11% reduction. What we noticed was that, and actually it is in the energy company's annual report, so they publicly acknowledge that they requested a new construction permit, so we don't know what was wrong with the one issued in 2015 in the end. It was rejected. The constructor, CMEC, was tasked to apply for a new construction permit for this installation, and to date, we still don't know. So to us, this is the first phase of the project, right? This desulfurization. Meantime, in 2014, the same company, CMEC, received a contract to build a new unit at the same power plant, a third unit. So we're wondering, can we trust this company if we already tasked it with building the DSOx installation and it's failed? What are the chances that the new unit would function as it says it will on paper? So this is another graphic representation of the emissions from 2018. I mean, they were basically 14 times above the the legal allowed ceiling in the Serbian provisions. And this is one of the Kostolac B3, the new unit, is one of the red dots on the map. It's being highly politically backed and moves, ahead of the normal process, permitting process. And then another of those red dots on the map is the Tuzla power plant in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which also has a contract, a financing contract with China Exim Bank. What happened, we heard in the morning how the loan covers 85% of the investment, and then the national company or the government, in the case of Serbia, for example, which took the loan on its own, it's not the company. In the case of Bosnia, it is the energy company which has taken the loan from the Chinese bank. So then that 15% is expected to be covered by the national level promoter. But then what the Chinese are asking as a guarantee is that the state guarantees the 85% of the loan as well, which, according to EU rules and energy community rules, is very difficult to approve. So then, earlier this year, there was a complaint or an investigation that was opened by the energy community itself, saying that this state guarantee for the 85% of the loan breaches state aid regulations. Then the Commissioner for EU Enlargement also made this point. What happened on the national level? There was the Bosnian Prime Minister meeting with the Chinese ambassador and kind of assuring or restating the confidence that the construction of the Tuzla power plant, it will go forward, whatever the complaints from the energy community or from the EU may be. So basically, can three tango? Can we have the EU? Can we have the national governments and the national rules? And can we have the Chinese actors at the same time? Bearing in mind, all the examples I showed about lack of transparency, how these projects are selected, how no information or hardly any information is ever disclosed, how there is, questionable technical quality, considering that coal generally is on a downward trend, and even commercial banks and export credit agencies and insurers are pulling out from coal projects. As I said earlier, even fossil fuel projects, that is the next goal if we're trying to stay anyway in compliance with the Paris Agreement and prevent our climate going even wilder than it is under a 2-degree scenario, 2-degree increase scenario. We expect countries to have at some point CO2 pricing, which will make electricity from power plants based on coal, will make it very expensive, and it won't be able to compete with the ever-decreasing prices for renewables these ways. And yeah, I mean, in the end, it is political decisions, so we have to hold our governments accountable for how these projects are being promoted, but I am impacted as a taxpayer as well, and how can I live with these decisions being taken on my behalf and expect it to be paid from my own pocket? So thank you very much. This was, in a nutshell, what I was hoping to say.